Hi, everybody. Welcome to Microsoft Ignite. My name's Ed Gallagher. Oops, sorry, my Outlook just popped up over there. My name's Ed Gallagher, and I would like to invite you here to the deploying meetings using Microsoft Teams. We're going to be diving into some of the admin side of things with Microsoft Teams and take a look at exactly how we can control the team's meeting behavior. There are some Microsoft and associated moderators that are on this particular meeting that we're having, and they're going to be answering your questions in the background. They might interrupt as we go through this presentation, talk a little bit about some of the questions that you might have if that occasion does arise. Again, as I said, my name is Ed Gallagher. I am not a Microsoft employee. I've been a Microsoft MVP for 14 years in a row now. I deal with a lot of different kinds of technology out in the real world with my customers, small, medium, and large businesses, different kinds of projects of different sizes. So let's first take a look at some of the things we want to talk about with regard to Teams to give us a little bit of a foundation of where this talk is going to go. First of all, we need to understand that there are some different kinds of meetings that you can have within Teams. Teams is, I like to compare it to a Swiss Army knife in some ways, because there's just so much stuff that you can do with it. But you can actually have internal meetings that are involving just people within your organization. But you can also enable Teams to allow external guest participation. There are a couple of different variants for guest access that we'll talk about a little bit later on. And there is a special kind of team meeting called a Microsoft Teams Live event, which is actually what we're participating in here today. These are Teams events that are geared primarily for larger scale. And do not actually have an interactive chat for the participants in the meeting, but there is a back channel interactive chat for the people that are running the meeting so that they can properly communicate and control what's going on there. So let's move forward here a little bit, talk about how meetings vary in some other respects. Meetings can be done one-on-one. One person to another. They can be done as a group meeting. You've got the ability to do on-demand meetings or impromptu meetings that involve just chat if you want. And we've also got the ability to, of course, incorporate multimedia of different kinds, audio, video, and desktop or application sharing. So there's some cool things that we can do from that side. Another way of dealing with meetings is that you can schedule them if they're not going to be on demand or impromptu. And we also have the ability to record meetings so that they can be played back in the future. There are several reasons for wanting to do that. You can probably think of a few of them on your own, but maybe you want to allow people that weren't able to attend the meeting originally to be able to see what it was that was happening during the meeting. Maybe there's some technical content that you want people to be able to replay the meeting so that they can review the technical content. So lots of other reasons to do that, but sometimes recording meetings are really a good idea. So we'll take a look at actually how to turn that on and control it a little bit. There are some expectations for you or of you as an attendant of this particular meeting. There's an expectation that you've got some basic familiarity with Teams itself. We are going to focus on the audio, video, and desktop sharing functionality here, but we'll also take a look at scheduling functionality, dealing with recording, as I had mentioned. I'm going to sprinkle some best practices stuff through all of this, things that I've learned over time working with my customers, some real life feedback to you that might be helpful. The first of which is something that I want to talk about is that if you want to go along with the hands-on stuff that I'm going to be pointing you at, you should have an administrative access to a non-production tenant, and I'll show you how to get to the hands-on stuff here in a little bit. Again, if you've got any questions as we move along, please just type them into the question window. You might want to include your name so it doesn't show up as just being anonymous, and that way people can respond back to you appropriately. And thanks everybody for dealing with the questions as we go through this. So first thing I want to take a look at is Learning Zone, or Microsoft Learning. We'll do a quick overview of that, talk about and show you actually some of the Teams learning pathways, and then particularly we're going to focus on the learning pathway for deploying meetings using Microsoft Teams. Here are some links that you can use to actually get to some of the things I'm going to be showing you in a moment. These links will be included in the Q&A response pane for you guys to find. But the first is the landing page for Microsoft Teams on the Microsoft Learn site. There is the learning path for deploying Microsoft Teams meetings, some interactive guides, and we'll look at an interactive guide specifically for deploying Teams meetings. So let me switch over to that quickly here. This is the homepage for Microsoft Learn. It's actually part of the docs structure now within Microsoft. And there's all sorts of things that you can get to and point to and browse through from here. I do recommend that you actually sign on with an ID that you might have already from you can use a Microsoft Tenant ID, for example, or a Microsoft account, Outlook.com, that kind of thing. But if you create an ID here, you can actually develop pathways. You can set aside different kinds of training that you want to take yourself and check them off as you go through them, refer back to them easily. So I do recommend that you take a look at doing that. The Microsoft Teams landing page, that first link that was on the screen that I showed you, that brings you here where you can actually browse all of the different Teams learning paths. And they've got a couple of samples of places for you to go out here that you might want to look at. The Teams Tech community, where you can engage with people, answering questions and trying to figure out some things that you might be trying to accomplish with Teams. A bunch of interactive videos and demos. And there's something called the Virtual Hub that allows you to interact with the product team to basically share information, ideas, things that you might want to look at. Here's a couple of paths that you might want to take a look going down: deploying Teams phone systems, enforcing security, onboarding users. In popular learning paths and modules, as you can see, there's so much content out here that Microsoft gives you for being able to learn how to do Microsoft Teams from an administrative perspective. There's also content out here, by the way, for end user training. So you might want to browse through some of that and take a look at what you might want to point your users to. This is basically setting up Microsoft Teams meetings for your organization. This is kind of a place where you can start to look at how you want to go about dealing with this. There's planning your Teams meeting deployment. That covers several topics: preparing for the deployment of Teams, what you need to do to include meetings with Teams, make sure that that's functioning correctly. We'll get to the actual controls for doing that a little bit. This is the section specifically on deploying meetings using Teams. And then, of course, we need to talk about security. We always got to talk about security in today's day and age. But you can actually dive down into these. You can do them sequentially. You can click your way through the different sections. One of the things I really like about the learning paths that Microsoft has up here is that it tells you how much time each of the sections are going to take. A lot of these are fairly brief when it comes to Teams. Some of the topics in other areas are quite a bit longer, but they tell you how long it takes to finish the entire module, and they break down each section so you know what you're biting off before you go into it. I find that to be very, very handy. Another phenomenal resource that Microsoft has out there for you are the interactive guides. So this allows you to dive into all sorts of different kinds of scenarios where you're looking at, what do I have to do from an interactive perspective? They actually take you through user interface changes, things like that, in order to turn on or control some sort of functionality within Teams. The third link there will get you to the interactive guides, which is actually part of a page that includes a bunch of other information also further up the page. Again, as you can see, there's just so much out here that Microsoft has to teach us. Lastly, I'm going to jump to the configuring and deploying Microsoft Teams. That was yelling a little bit at us. Sorry about that. But this is the interactive guide. And when you actually start the interactive guide, there's actually, it'll take you through a process of how to connect to Teams, and there's actually a checklist for you to check off as you go through this, and the guide will progress through into the different screens and walk you through the whole process of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So really nice hands-on environment without having to actually have built out your own environment with a test tenant or some other non-production. Remember, don't mess around playing or experimenting in a production environment. You don't want to make a mistake as you're learning and cause something bad to happen for the company there. So be careful of that. Next thing to look at here is upgrading to Microsoft Teams. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but you may be actually utilizing some of some other product, or whether it's a Microsoft product or somebody else's product to do meetings. There's some good discussion here, good information about how to go through an upgrade process. Just, there are several steps involved when you're doing an upgrade from existing Skype for Business implementation to a Teams implementation. There are different stages that you may choose to go through. You don't have to. It just depends on the size of your organization and what kind of training you can put in place and what kind of controls you want to set up as you progress through the process. But Microsoft does give you some granular controls so that you can phase Teams in as a replacement for Skype for Business. And they even talk a bit here about a hybrid scenario where you've got some on-site, on-premises Skype environments that you're working with, and you want to transition to the Teams environment in the cloud. So I really encourage you to explore through this and play with it, learn from it, and remember, knowledge is power in this business. The more that you know about the different products and tools that you're trying to implement, truly the better off you're going to be when it comes to being successful at what it is that you're going to be rolling out. So let's take a look at the scenario that we're going to run through here. The idea is that we're working for a company, and this is actually a scenario that's built into some of those modules that I just showed you. The company that we're working for, there's a need for audio-video conferencing like there is pretty much everywhere these days. We want to be able to support office-based and work-from-home users, of course, especially with all the work-from-home that we're doing. In addition, we want to be able to collaborate with customers, though. So We want to be able to properly control Teams so that we can open it to users from the outside world to have them participate into the meetings that we're having. We also want to be able to record meetings for on-demand playback for reasons I mentioned before, and probably others too. In this scenario, we're currently migrating from a third-party solution to Microsoft Teams. But I can tell you right now that I have personally not run into a scenario where there's been a third-party meeting product in place that interferes or complicates in any way the implementation of Microsoft Teams, because those third-party products, they're isolated from the Microsoft ecosphere. That you've got to maintain your own list of user identities in those third-party products, separate from what you're doing in the Microsoft Office 365 and Azure world. You've got to control your security separately there. It's basically, in my opinion, kind of a headache to duplicate a lot of the stuff that you need to manage in a separate environment there from the third-party side. So the advantage here coming from third party is that you can go ahead and start rolling out Microsoft Teams as appropriate within your organization, and just tell people either all in one shot or gradually to stop using the third-party product. I've done that actually for several companies recently that were using third-party products, and when I showed them what they could do, what they were already paying for because of their Office 365 subscriptions, they immediately said, well, let's get out of that third-party product that we're paying money for and roll back into implementing Microsoft Teams within the organization. And they've been very, very happy from that. I just had one of my clients call me middle of last week and said how happy he was with what they've done so far with Teams, and they want to jump into the next step and start implementing more things that I'll talk about in a little bit here. All right, let's get to some hands-on. We want to take a look here at user setup. There's a couple of things that we have to deal with from the user side. We've got to be able to manage the user's access to Microsoft Teams, and that's done through obtaining product licenses that include Teams as part of the product itself in the Microsoft Cloud ecosphere. And then we've got to assign the licenses. Now that can be done in two different ways. You can do it through the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, where you can do a point and click. You can even select multiple items and assign a batch. And that's fine if you're dealing in the SMB market or if you're just adding a few new users on. But when you're first switching a company over, and you've got more than maybe 20, 30 users, that's a lot of point and clicking to do. So you might want to take a look at using PowerShell. PowerShell, if you're not familiar with it, is a phenomenal environment for both doing interactive commands and creating scripts that allow you to control Microsoft computers, whether they're workstations or servers, and also allowed you to control a lot of the Microsoft Cloud environment. And Office 365 and Teams included does have a lot of PowerShell capabilities that you might want to take a good close look at. Just so you know, I do use PowerShell, but I'm not a PowerShell guru. I am more of the kind of person where if I need to do a bunch of something, I will go ahead and write a PowerShell script for it, and I might run that script, fairly often, maybe even once a week or whatever. But I don't actually have to type in the commands and remember what the commands are. So I'm not really good at the interactive side of using PowerShell, which is actually one of its real beauties, in my opinion, and also in the was one of its design goals too from the gentleman that invented PowerShell that works for Microsoft, Jeffrey Snover. So let's take a look at the managing user access to Microsoft Teams and some product licensing and assignment of the licenses. Let me flip over to this screen here. So I have already logged in to office.com through the web interface. And this is my landing page when I log in there. And I'm going to go because the user account that I'm utilizing is an admin. I've got the little admin utility symbol down here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And that'll flip me over to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. There's a lot of things that you can start doing from here. Microsoft has done some work recently to try to simplify this interface a little bit and give you quick access to the things that most people use quickly. But if you do want to see more, you can click on the Show All. It gives you much more to look at here. And even though it says it's Show All, it's actually not showing all. There's other things that you can still get to. For example, there's a list of admin centers down here, but these are only the popular admin centers. There are actually a whole bunch of admin centers for doing detailed granular administration of a lot of different things within the Microsoft Cloud ecosphere there. So if we jump to billing, this is where we can take a look at the products that we've already purchased, and tells us how many licenses we have, how many have been assigned. We can go ahead and purchase additional products by going to purchase services. We could add more licenses through there, but since we've already got the licenses purchased, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do a license assignment. Very quick and easy to do. In this case, you can see that Adele is currently unlicensed. I'm just going to click on the line that contains her identity, go to licenses and apps, and I've got a list of the different licenses that we've purchased. Even if we don't have any more licenses that are available for that subscription, it's still going to show up. Maybe in this case it's a trial, so we can't do anything about that because the trial's expired, but it's also possible that you may just be out of licenses and need to buy more, and there's actually a way to purchase more directly through this interface here. In this case, we're going to add in Office 365 for this user. This in particular is Office 365 E3, which is one of the enterprise licenses. We also are going to add in Windows 10 Enterprise E3 and Enterprise Mobility and Security. And let's go ahead and throw in compliance also. Just doing this to show you that there are potentially lots of different kinds of things that you can add in to someone's mix of licenses, depending upon what it is that you need. In this particular circumstance, we do have just an Office license, but there's also something called Microsoft 365 that actually contains a lot of these other things built into it, so you don't have to add them in individually. Okay, I've been switching my clients over to Microsoft 365 for the additional security and power for controlling things to deal with compliance issues. Now, as we click on all these things, you may have noticed that there are apps that keep getting added in down here at the bottom. The app count keeps increasing. And if I click the drop down, it'll show me what those apps are. And some of the different products actually contain multiple apps within them. Office 365, for example, has got about 20 out of this list. So there are some things from a best practice standpoint that you may want to look at. If your organization does have compliance requirements, then you may be required to roll out new functionality to your end users only under a controlled scenario. And that means before you turn on the functionality for the end user, they have to go through proper training. You've got to have the security configured correctly and all the rest of that stuff. One of the great things I think about the way the Microsoft Cloud works is that the functionality by default is mostly enabled when you purchase a license. Notice that as I added those licenses in, everything is checked here, okay? But you may actually want to take a close look at all of the different apps within each of these licenses and decide, should I or should I not enable those for an end user at this time? I do know quite a few companies that have actually gone in and applied the licenses, but actually turned off Microsoft Teams initially for all of their users because they want to make sure that they do Teams right. Now, as I had mentioned, Teams is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. It interacts with a whole bunch of Microsoft stuff on the back end. We're talking about interacting with SharePoint, Exchange, Stream, OneDrive, all Microsoft Azure, of course. So there's lots of things that are being tied in there. And if you're in an environment where compliance is an issue, take a good close look at that before you just start turning everything on for people. Okay, but in this case, we've got what we need to give Adele access. And at that point, let me get to my little button down here at the bottom. We're going to click on Save Changes. And it'll pop up and say the changes have been saved. So the licenses have now been applied to her, and you can see that she does have all of those licenses applied. Now, one of the things about turning on Teams, and this from an admin perspective, this should be part of your thought process in preparing for this. Teams is involved with so much of the other functionality in the Microsoft Cloud that it can take a little while for that to actually get provisioned for an end user. So it's not like you can just click on a button and then 8 seconds later that person has the functionality. It can take a little time. It depends a little bit about you know, how many users you're doing at the same time, what kind of other stuff is happening within your tenant to provide stress in that environment. Microsoft actually kind of controls the amount of resources that are being devoted to the provisioning process to make your end users' existing experience be more robust. So be patient with this. They do warn you when you provision someone with Teams. There was a warning that popped up here that says it might take up to 24 hours to fully set that person up in Teams. In almost all cases, I see it done within an hour, okay? If I'm setting this up for 100 users in one shot, it might take a couple hours, maybe a little bit longer, but it actually is a pretty quick process. That Microsoft is under promising and over delivering here when it comes to how quickly this works. So. Any questions anybody wants to throw my way yet? Any of the moderators? Please feel free to pop in. All right, so let me take you down into, let's see, so it's the product licensing. I just want to mention one other thing about the product licensing, though. You really should take a very close look at the different kinds of licenses that Microsoft has available out there. As I mentioned, I've been finding that when we actually crunch the numbers, the new Microsoft 365 licenses are really beneficial for my clients. And every single one of them that I've presented the option of switching from Office 365 to Microsoft 365 to, every single one of them has gone with that. There is really great bang for the buck with this, but pretty much anything that says Microsoft 365 Business or Microsoft 365 E series, which are like an E3 or an E5. Those are the enterprise packages. They're all going to include Teams in them. And the same with the Office 365. We've got E3, E5. E1 is the cloud only, no installed applications on the workstation. That exists in the Microsoft and in the Office 365 world. And that also gives you access to Teams there. So a lot of functionality a lot of different licenses can bring Teams to the forefront within your organization. All right, let's see. Next thing to get to is to actually look at what we need to set up within Teams itself to deal with how users are going to interact with Teams and what Teams is going to allow them to do. Okay, so in order to take a look at that, let me flip, and specifically we're going to look at meeting policies. We'll take a look at doing that through the Teams Admin Center, talk about some policy details, and then we'll take a look at the end user experience from that perspective also. So from the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, in the list of admin centers down below here, you can see that there is a Teams Admin Center, and clicking on that will actually get you to this page. Of course, you can just type in admin.teams.microsoft.com and it'll jump you there also, or have a hyperlink in your favorites list for that. But from the dashboard here, it'll show you a little bit about user activity, kinds of searches that have been done, the different Teams utilizations that have been done. This is just a demo tenant that was set up recently, so there's really nothing that's been happening here. But there are lots of metrics that you can actually compile to appropriately be able to determine, are your users actually adopting Teams and utilizing the functionality. Okay, so if you work your way down through this Teams list, you can manage the actual teams that you have created within your organization from this list here. Clicking on any of these would get you to a pane with management functionality for that particular team. Outside the scope of what we're talking about in this particular session, but there's again a lot of information on that on the Microsoft Learn site. This is where we can take a look at the Teams policies. Now this is basically the policies for Teams itself. There is one that is created by default that is global for the entire organization, but we could also add new ones that would be custom policies and apply them to different parts of our organization from there. So here basically what we're looking at is, do we want to have the ability to create private channels? And that's turned on in this particular case. And if I don't want users to create private channels, then I can turn that off from here. Okay. A private channel, just for your reference, is a channel that's only available to users that have been specifically invited to join that channel. They cannot find it by browsing through the Teams environment. Devices, we've got all sorts of different actual hardware that we can take a look at, and we'll touch on that a little bit in the future. There's locations. You can take a look at the users that have actually been provisioned to utilize Teams. What we want to dive into, though, here is some of the policies. Okay, the meeting policies right here. There are several that exist by default that you can apply to different kinds of environments. Like, for example, if you've got a kiosk system that you want to have in your organization that allows people to participate in a Teams functionality. Okay, this one is basically all on. let's go ahead and take a look at that one, and we'll see exactly what we mean by all on. So if this was not a default policy, I could go ahead and make changes here if I created a new one. Actually, let's do that. Let's go back to meeting policies here, and let's just pop a new one out, and we can give it a name. Actually, this is a test meeting policy. And here's where we can choose some of the functionality. Within Teams itself, it's possible to do spontaneous ad hoc meetings actually from within the Teams channels. We can turn that functionality off. Do you want the Outlook add-on to be enabled? That can get turned off here. I really like the Outlook add-on. I find it to be the easiest and most versatile way to actually configure Teams meetings. I recommend that everybody look at that. Encourage you to leave it on and train your end users on some of the cool things you can do with that Outlook add-on. Excuse me for a moment. We can also control whether or not we can schedule meetings either in channels or scheduling private meetings in a private channel. And turning that functionality off there might have some value within your organizations from a compliance standpoint. Audio and video controls. We have the ability here to turn off the ability to record a meeting globally within this area of influence of this policy. And if we are allowing the recordings, we can also choose to allow transcription to occur. Okay, this will actually analyze a recording and, using voice recognition, create a transcription of the conversations during the meeting event. And it is even capable of identifying different speakers from each other, and it will identify speaker 1, speaker 2, etc. So pretty neat from there. From that standpoint. We do have the ability to provide some control over whether or not we're using IP audio or IP video, and we can disable that functionality here. We can actually have IP video turned off here also. Bitrate controls. Content sharing. Here's something we need to get into. So, do you want people involved in a meeting to be able to share their desktop or the applications that they're using? In a lot of cases, I find this to be extremely valuable, especially when I'm doing tech support for people. I can have them share their screen with me through Teams, and I can help figure out what it is that's happening or not happening on their particular system. One of the things that you do have the ability to control in a policy here is whether or not you're going to allow the request for control. So not only can an end user share their screen with me through Teams, but I could then request control of their desktop, and they would of course, acknowledge the fact that they're giving control to me, and then I'd have control of their keyboard and mouse and could actually demonstrate to them the right way to accomplish something. So some nice things you can do from there. There are some controls for individual applications here for the PowerPoint sharing and for whiteboard. Whiteboarding is actually really nice. I've been using that with more clients, showing them how to do that. It allows collaborative drawing, sketching, laying out ideas interactively through the Teams participants. Nice stuff there. And there's the ability to actually post notes within Teams, and you can choose to allow the notes to be shared or not. One of the things I did tell you we would talk about is guest access. The controls that you want to look at here, there are some variants that are going to have some security implications because you are talking about letting people from outside in. Okay, so the first switch is, do you want to allow anonymous people to start a meeting? In other words, if I send a meeting request to the outside world and I send it to a bunch of people at their email addresses, that's good. Meetings request is going to have a link on it that they can click on and join the meeting anonymously. Do I really want them to start that meeting before someone from the company actually gets in and has control? I would say probably not. So I always leave that turned off. There are different controls that you can have for the presenters. So we can say that organizers basically have presenter rights, but users can override that. Everyone in the organization could be a presenter, but the user can override, or everyone, including people that are not in the organization, can actually have presenter rights. So that does allow other people to share their desktop with you, even though you may not be part of the same organization. One of the other controls we have is, do we want to automatically admit people into a meeting? You could say, yeah, we're going to do that for everyone, or only if they're part of our organization, or only if they're part of our organization or another organization that we have federated with. Or is it organizers only are allowed to come in automatically? And at that point, anybody that's not an organizer that joins is going to have to be manually admitted. They'll be kind of held in the lobby, and then you got to click on the buttons to let them come in. If you're doing an audio conference bridge, then there's the ability here to allow dial-in users to bypass the lobby. That, again, is something you're going to have to look at within your organization or different parts of your organization to see if that's appropriate to have or not. And do you want to allow private meetings to be spontaneous, allowing the Meet Now functionality? Do you want to enable live captions? This is on the fly voice recognition that actually puts captions on the screen during the presentation. Very useful if you're in an environment that requires, in America, for example, we've got the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA, that companies have to comply with. But what your area may have its own requirements for dealing with live captioning that you might want to take a look at. And you can also choose whether or not you want to allow chat to occur within a meeting or not. Okay, so lots of different kinds of controls within here that you should really take a good look at from a security perspective in most cases there. So do we want to allow anonymous users to join a meeting? Sure, this is under our meeting settings for this policy. And do we want to customize the email invitations? You can put in some URLs here for different kinds of content that would be plugged into the actual meeting invitation that is sent out. And then once you've customized that, you can preview that. If you're implementing a converged network where you're not, where you're actually running like voice over IP and regular network traffic over the same infrastructure, then it's probably a good idea for you to have your infrastructure implemented with something called quality of service, QoS. And if you do have that implemented within your network, then you might want to turn that on here so that teams can also take advantage of those QoS settings. And your infrastructure people may have some specific port requirements that they want to plug in. That can be customized here also. I did mention before about the live meetings, and we do have some controls for that. A bit out of the scope of our talk today and the time that we have, but again, lots of good information on the Learning website. Let me jump back up here to Conference Bridges. This is where you would go ahead and control the functionality of different phone numbers that get allocated to your Teams environment that would allow people to connect to a meeting if they have to do it through a telephone because they don't have audio capabilities on the computer that they're using, or they aren't even sitting at a computer at the moment and they need to tie in just through a phone for the audio portion only. Now, you don't get this by default, okay? There is an extra license. It's one of the components in the Microsoft Voice suite of functionality that you can purchase these licenses. They're $4 per user that you want to be able to create a meeting with one of these phone numbers. Any number of your users can participate in a meeting that somebody else has a license for, that they have generated a request that includes one of these numbers. No license is required for the participants that are dialing in, only for the people that are creating the meetings. And that information is actually generated automatically for the end user when they create the meeting invitation. That information about the dial-in access is automatically populated in that meeting invitation. One other thing that I thought of just now that I probably should mention, don't forget, or maybe you don't know yet, Teams is available as an app actually on both the iPhone and the Android platform. So I often use the Teams app on my phone to participate in meetings, and I can even see the video, of course, that's streaming from those meetings. And I could even actually turn my camera on my phone to stream from that. So you get pretty good functionality on the mobile apps on the Microsoft side of things here too. As you can see, there is a long list of other things to run through here, so we don't have the time to dive into all that. But one of the places that you might want to go is to take a look at the planning section down here. There's a Teams advisor that will walk you through some different things to look at, some steps that you might want to complete in order to assess your network and your deployment process, make sure it's looking good. And let's get out of that. Go back to Teams here. And there's also a network planner here that will allow you to look at how to design your network infrastructure if you're in a complex environment. So take a peek at those as need be. But again, I'm very impressed at the amount of information that Microsoft gives to you to help you learn how to do all this stuff efficiently and well. So I think that is about it from that section. Let's go back in. Over here. Wrapping up this particular section, we're going to take a look at the end user experience and how to attend a meeting, whether we want to use the browser or the app. We'll also take a look at a little bit about the invitation functionality that exists there too. Give me just a moment. I'm going to need to switch over to Outlook. And so it's going to take a moment for that to kick in. Yeah, there we go. Good to go. And first thing I want to show you here is the actual Outlook client, the installed application. Here I am in that demo tenant, and I'm going to go ahead and click on my calendar here. And since I've got all this different functionality enabled, I can go in, double click on a date, and I can give a title to that meeting. I can schedule its time. I don't want it all day. I just want it to be certain times during the day. Let's do it at the end of the month. I can do all sorts of controls there, control time zones, everything like that. If you've enabled the Outlook add-in, you've actually got the ability to turn this into a Teams meeting right from here. But notice that I don't have a button up here to turn it into a Teams meeting. So because that has not been enabled in this tenant, it's not going to go ahead and create that meeting from that perspective. So another way of getting to this is by going through either the Teams client signed into your tenant or to the Teams web app. And let me jump into the web app. And if I go back here and choose Microsoft Teams, I'm getting into the web app side of things here. Not a bad idea to have some information in your invitations to actually include instructions to the users you're sending this out to, especially if they're external, that if they don't have the Teams app, they don't have to install the Windows app on their computers. They can actually just use the web app instead. So you might want to point that out in the invitations. And yeah, they want to tell me a little bit about all the cool stuff that Teams is doing here. And from here, I can go to calendar. And I can go ahead and just click on a time and a date to make any scheduling changes I want. I can add a title here. Meeting 2, even though my spelling is terrible. And then I can start adding my attendees in, whoever it is that is required to join us here. And it does use the address book in Exchange, so that as I start typing somebody's name in, it'll start filtering based upon the particular letters that I've already typed. So I could go ahead and invite Adele to this, and when I'm all done, I could click on send, and she would have a meeting invitation waiting for her. Okay. Let's see. Next thing to look at. I also did want to mention that there are some end user differences if they're using the browser or the app. Some things are not yet available through the browser, like depending upon the scenario of internal and external users and whether their browser is involved or not, they may not be able to give control. So again, you'd want to do some testing, keep track of that. As far as what the different capabilities are, Microsoft is continuously evolving the capabilities within Teams, and there are some ways that you can keep track of that. If you do a search for the Microsoft Teams roadmap, you can actually find information there. But there's another spot that I wanted to show you that is back in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. If you click on Health, there is the Message Center here. And what Microsoft does through the Message Center is they send out, as you can see, a lot of updates about all of the different new functionality, the things that are changing in the Microsoft Cloud ecosphere to enhance what it is your users can do, enhance what you can do as an IT admin, improve the functionality, improve the efficiency. You really need to pay attention to what's in this list. Go through and read these and understand that some of them might have an impact on your end users because some functionality may be coming out that's new. Maybe you need to control that for your compliance needs or do some training to your end users before they actually are able to use it effectively. So keep that in mind if you would also. All right, finally now, let's get into the recording meetings. As I said that we already went through the controls for that, but I want to talk a little bit more about the controls from a licensing and permissions perspective, and then storage and transcription. So if we jump back over to the Admin Center, and I scroll back up to where I can take a look at my active users. As I had mentioned before, Teams actually has a lot of involvement with other components of the Microsoft Cloud. So if we take a look again at the licenses and apps, and I'm going to pare things down a little bit in the list by turning off all of the fancy Windows 10 and compliance stuff. So we basically just have kind of a basic set of things that you get with Office 365, just because your identity exists, and then what you get from Office 365 itself. So let's go ahead and save that out. And then I want to take a look at the actual apps themselves. All right, so as we take a look through this list, some of the things that you're going to need just to be able to do recordings, the end user is going to need to have access to, it's in the list here, of course, Microsoft Teams itself, but they're going to need probably access to Microsoft Stream. Now, the reality is somebody that doesn't have a license allocated for Microsoft Stream, they can actually record a meeting, but it's kind of stored in a special place in the Microsoft Cloud, and it's automatically deleted in 20 days. Okay, so if you want to be able to retain a recording, they're going to have a license for Microsoft Streams to be able to do that. Okay, they're also going to need to have access to SharePoint, and that's here in the list somewhere. Probably jumped over it, but anyway, it's in there someplace, I know. SharePoint, again, almost all of the file storage that takes place in the Office Microsoft 365 world, almost all of the actual file storage is actually done through the SharePoint Cloud infrastructure. So they're going to need to have a license for that also. If they've got licenses for those two additional things other than Teams, then recording works very well, and it's easy to do. There's just a button that you need to click on within the meeting itself to start the recording, and it's automatically saved off for that user into their SharePoint storage. Again, assuming that you've got the controls set within your tenant to allow them to do a recording, okay, as we covered earlier. So things to look at from that perspective. There's the user's going to have enough storage available for them. And if the recording is stored, if they store it, for example, in their OneDrive, every user that has a Microsoft 365 license or an Office 365 license in most of the categories actually has a terabyte of storage in their OneDrive. So there's a lot of recordings that you can store in that space. If they're going to store it elsewhere in SharePoint, so it's accessible to people across the organization, the amount of storage that you get within SharePoint for the company is going to vary depending upon the number of licenses that you have. So there's some math behind that, and you can do a quick search on the web to be able to find that kind of information out. I also did show you the control that allows you to turn on transcription for those recordings. Again, very helpful in some circumstances, so might want to take a look at that. Let's see, we're getting down to the wire here. We've got about 15 minutes left, so let's start to get to the point where we're wrapping things up. Anybody want to throw a question at me that still is on the fire? Then in that case, let's go into Microsoft Teams rooms. Again, thank you everybody else on this call that's handling all the questions from the users. Much appreciated. So we're going to take a look at very briefly here, because this is actually a big topic. But one of the things that you're eventually going to want to evolve into, pretty good chance anyway, is to implement something that enables a room to be used with Microsoft Teams. So instead of having somebody to bring a laptop in and out of a meeting room or something like that just to have a meeting, there are other things that you can do within a meeting room to actually spin up Teams functionality. Some of this involves utilizing Teams hardware that actually has Teams functionality built into it that's been certified by Microsoft to work with Teams appropriately and give all sorts of potentially all sorts of different extra whistles and bells. But there's also some other hardware out there that supports something called Cloud Video Interop that will work with Teams, but it may not actually include all the functionality that you're looking for, but it might be something that you already have that you could spin up and get to start to work with Teams. There actually is a training section on Microsoft Teams Rooms out on the teamsonlearn site that will take you through the deployment steps and whether or not you should consider using Cloud Video Interop or not within your environment based upon what your actual needs are. So having said that, I am going to jump back over to this browser, and I'm going to take you to basically a landing page where you can start to look at Microsoft Teams devices. Okay, Microsoft.com/Microsoft365/Microsoft-Teams/across devices. Or just do a search for Teams devices. Now you've got the ability here to shop either by device or by space. If you shop by device, for example, you can get into different categories of headphones and headsets, speaker phones. Got a lot of clients that are really up on the speakerphone side of things, because even if you do have a laptop or something that you're bringing into a meeting room, having a speakerphone in that meeting room can really add a lot to it. But you might want to look at web cameras. Some of the web cameras have special functionality that allow you to actually use Teams to control where the camera is pointing. When you're looking at web cameras, make sure that you deal with something that's appropriate for the room that you're actually going to implement this in. There is some design work that's needed here, some analysis that you might have to do to make sure that you're actually getting the right products. Some of these headsets are pretty neat too. They actually have buttons on the side of the headset that actually allow you to control Teams functionality directly from the headset. So take a peek at what some of those things that are available there, and take a look at how all that ties into the big Teams picture. All right, so that pretty much gets done with the content that I wanted to look at here, except for covering some best practices. First, a reminder, as I said before, only experiment in a non-production tenant. This is something that should be done in all aspects of IT. You don't want to break what the business needs to run, okay? Also recommend that you follow the principle of least privilege. You should not be logging in as an admin all the time to everything. My regular user account that I use every day in my network and with Office 365 has no administrative privileges. Whenever I need access to anything in my environment on site or in the cloud that requires admin privileges, then I have to use a user ID dedicated to administration. And some of my clients require even more granularity than that. For example, we'll have some users that can administer SQL environments in Azure and others that can only administer other kinds of servers that are not SQL related. So follow the least privileged stuff, even when it comes to cloud functionality like Teams. You can actually have a Teams admin that is a mini admin administrator that is dedicated to just doing the Teams environment. Governance. When Teams was rolling out, and ever since then, actually, every conversation that I've had with Microsoft, whenever we talk about new features and new stuff that's coming up, governance is always part of that communication. So what we mean by governance here is that you want to have some level of control. That doesn't mean that you need to be really strict and, you know, not let your users have any freedom in what they're doing, but you want to make sure that what they do actually makes sense in your business environment, and that the users have the appropriate training to figure out what they should and shouldn't do. Okay, I have seen more than just a few Teams deployments fail because it was simply turned on or left on, and people discovered it and started jumping around inside it, and the next thing you know, there's 57 teams that have been created by all sorts of different people that basically all have the same functionality, and there's not that single place to go for the information that you're looking for, the collaboration that you need to do. So phase in the functionalities. Teams is really, really easy to use. They can accomplish a huge number of different really productive things with it. Every client that I've ever worked with has said that they are more productive after implementing Teams than before. Okay, sometimes there's a little pain involved with that transition because you do have to learn how to control the new tools, but basically it's been overall great for all of my clients. But there's a lot of power behind that too, and without proper controls and without proper governance and proper training and education, that power can be dangerous to your security. So be careful about that. Go through the training, learn about what needs to be controlled, if it needs to be controlled in your environment, and then roll it out in a test environment. Then target a set of users within your environment. Sometimes they're called canary users, the first ones that like to try the new cool thing that's coming out. Provide some training and guidance for them first, and then based upon the feedback that you get from those initial users, adjust your deployment plan and training needs as required for a deployment that you're trying to accomplish here. Keep your eye on security. Can you go a whole day without hearing about some breach somewhere? Okay, You could have the best security in the world when it comes to the technology that you're using, solid steel doors and titanium hinges, but one little tiny block of wood that props that door open, and that blows away all your security that you thought that you purchased. It has to be implemented correctly. So keep an eye on your compliance needs and keep an eye on the safety of your intellectual property. And training is really important. You got a training from an IT pro perspective, the end user perspective, and everybody needs to be involved with security. Last thing to really talk about is the Microsoft Ignite Cloud Skills Challenge. This is something that Microsoft has done that's really cool here during Ignite. If you go to this link, myignite.microsoft.com/learningzone, you can actually go through some challenges that Microsoft has compiled within the Learning Zone. And if you complete all of those challenges within the time frame that Microsoft has allotted here, you can actually win a free Microsoft certification exam. Now, I've got about 100 certs under my belt. I'm still earning more. I find them to be very, very valuable as a way of providing my clients with a benchmark of where my knowledge is at, where my expertise lies. And I highly encourage you to take a look at doing it too. You get a free one. How can you go wrong with that? If you have any questions, you can, if you choose to, reach out to me. Ed Gallagher at uptimecns.com is my email. Make sure you put something in the subject line so that I know it's related to the Teams Ignite sessions, and I will get back to you. My Twitter is at ITProMCT. I don't do a lot of tweeting, trying to start to do more, but I do have my Twitter account set so that you can see everybody that I follow. I follow some people to hear their tweets to figure out what it is that they have to say that can really impact what I'm doing. And of course, my LinkedIn account is there also. So everybody, thank you for attending. Please continue to put your questions into the question area. If they haven't been answered already, we will certainly get back to them. And again, you can email me if you choose to. Thank you for attending Ignite. Thank you for attending this session. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to you, wherever you are. Be well and be safe. Thanks again.